Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In the last video I received a comment from a fellow game developer who wanted me to explain my workflow for creating puzzles for my games. I thought it would be an interesting thing to grab the first game I released, Head Wizard, and have a look at the level design behind it. So, right here we have the first level. The first level is fairly simple, but it serves a purpose. The main thing is that you can not go left too far. Of course the controls are also here in text, but you cannot go left, so I expect the player to go right. And then here there is a little ramp. It's fairly simple, but this gives me a little bit of information as a game designer, because after this point I know the player knows how to control the character and the player knows how to jump. So right here there is a little portal thingy. I expect the player to walk into it and see what happens. If you walk into it, you can see that the portal opens up a little bit and gives a little bit of feedback that something is happening. So I'm going to go a little bit ahead. Right here you can see that there's a little bit more complicated platforming. If the player falls down, he cannot reach this point, so he has to jump here. Right here there is a pit. If the player were to not jump, he falls in and the level resets. It's not too hard of a punishment because the level is really short, so the player doesn't really have to do a lot of work over. So right here there is another portal. And then here the interesting part of the game begins. There is some instructions on how to throw the hat. Right here I deliberately made this pit too wide to jump over. So if the player tries to jump, he cannot jump towards the statue. So he really has to throw the hat. I've seen a lot of players throw the hat and then just try to jump. Doesn't work. They have to throw the hat and then they have to press Z again to teleport. And after this point I know that the player at least somewhat has an idea of that the hat can be thrown onto objects and then can teleport. So yeah, here in the next level there is a little block here with a 1 on it. The 1 becomes important later, but now it's just a block. If the player stands on it, the block will drop down. Then there are some other blocks. These move automatically, so you don't have to stand on them to activate it. And it's just a little platforming sequence to get used to these new blocks. If the player falls off, there's no hard punishment. You can just walk back and try again. And then there's the second time that the player has to use the hat. It's to reinforce the mechanic a little bit, so I know that the player can mess around with it a little bit. And then a little bit more platforming. A little bit more difficult in the head of the player because there is a pit below, so there's more at stake here. This is why I made it quite a simple platforming section, just you don't have to try really hard to make this. So this is one of the most important levels in the game. At this point the player knows how to throw his hat, knows how to walk and jump, and knows how to teleport. But there's one very important mechanic that I want to be sure that the player understands. And that is that the hat can be thrown onto an object, and after that the player can move around and place the statue on top of the block. This is the intended solution. A lot of people will try, I'll restart it really quick. A lot of people will try to jump and throw their hat onto the block. In playtesting, many people did this, which indicated to me that they didn't really know yet that the hat can be thrown onto something and then you can move freely after that. So this is one of the main reasons that I didn't put a jumping throw into the game, because I had to make sure that people knew that after throwing the hat, they can move. Now the 2 is a little hint. The earlier blocks, as I mentioned before, they had a 1, which was important because it tells one object has to stand on it. this block has to have 2 objects to lower. So yeah, getting back at the descending blocks, here there is a little hint. This block will lower itself a little bit as you walk over it, so to remind the player, hey, watch out for these blocks, they will drop, and then the player sees a pit and a lot of these blocks, so the player now knows that there is going to be a more difficult platforming section. Here the player has a choice. I put the statue on top of the block, so the player could either jump on top of the block, which would lower the block because there are 2 objects on it, or the player can use the hat and switch places and the block won't lower, to make it a little bit easier. This is one of the things where you can see the difference between people who like platforming more or puzzling more, because the puzzlers will often choose the hat option. Well, here there is a similar section, but you have to do the jumping here. There's no way you can use your head here, so the statue is just there to make the block lower, but I wanted there to be a little bit more surface to run over before you had to make the jump to the next block. And here there is a very easy jump to make, but a little bit tricky because the block will drop, so you have to be quick. The reason I put this in the end is because it was the simplest jump, and usually at the end of the level the stakes are higher because you have to redo a lot more than when you die at the beginning of the level. So usually I tend to put the easier stuff at the end and the more difficult stuff at the beginning, as to smear out the difficulty a little bit over the level. Now here there's an interesting timing puzzle. I will restart the level and show you what happens if I walk on top of this block right away. Then you will probably not make this jump. Now there is a little bit of timing involved here. And this is to indicate to the player, hey, don't rush through the level, think a little bit before you run. Because the later levels will require a lot of timing. Again, the similar puzzle where the player can choose to switch places with the statue as to make the platforming a little bit easier. And now it's time for the first enemy. Well, the only enemy, I think. Except if you count the boss. When starting the level, if you jump up right away, you get shot by the enemy. So the player has to wait a little bit, and now they know this is not a friendly enemy. Again, the player doesn't know this mechanic yet, but dying here isn't too bad because there's nothing at stake. You just start over right away. So the player has to wait a little bit. And here the player can throw the hat onto the enemy, and if they try to, well, they will notice first that the laser turns off, so they can walk past it. But most people just try to switch places immediately, which is the wrong choice because they will get shot in the back. So they have to figure out that they have to put the enemy down here, where the enemy cannot shoot. I've seen some people who put the enemy at the end. But yeah, then they've created a little situation for themselves because now the enemy's walking around there. They can be quick though. Similar level, but a little bit longer. Similar situation with the enemy where they have to dump the enemy somewhere. Just leaving it here was not a smart choice because then there's lasers everywhere, so they have to get rid of the enemy. And the intended solution is to put the enemy over here. This is why there's a little gap here in the level. But some people will put the enemy up ahead, down in that pit. Now here the player can choose to get rid of that enemy on the left or not. And this is a little bit of an inversion from the earlier puzzle. They have to put the enemy up here or maybe further back. Now it's a similar situation as before, but the player has to time the block lowering carefully, because if they lower the block at the wrong time, they will get shot. So they have to wait a little bit for the enemy to turn around and then throw the hat. And after this there's some more platforming, but nothing really new except for some variations. Again, I had to time this a little bit better. So I will just play along now, and I will come back to you as soon as there's something interesting to tell again. So yeah, this is a very important point in the game. This is a hint for a later puzzle in the game, a very important hint, because here the player notices that the statues stop the lasers. So they won't shoot the player, and they won't even go past the statues if there's one in the way. Also, this puzzle is a little bit fun, I think, because there's multiple solutions here. One of the solutions would be put the statue and the wizard on top of the block. The other would be just walk along with the enemy. Another solution would be to just grab the statue, put it there with the enemy, do this. There's a lot of possibilities here. Now this one also has a lot of possibilities for solutions. One of them would be to throw your head onto the statue, and the timing is really tight. So I have to jump down as soon as he turns around. This is one way. The other way would be to just get rid of the enemy by throwing them into a pit. Interestingly, I figured out through the comment section of this game on Kongregate that some people didn't quite get that they could drop enemies into pits. Here there is another hint, which I hope some of the players will pick up. And this is that the statue can be dropped from mid-air. I jumped through the laser there a little bit. Anyway, the statue has to be dropped from the air here. The player could also just walk down, but it's one of the things that player could be motivated to do. And this is the level I was talking about a little bit earlier, where it was important for the player to know that the lasers could be stopped by a block. If I stand on this block just like this to get to the exit, I get shot. So the player has to figure something out, which is put the block on top of that thing. Barely made it. Stand behind the statue. That way I can get to the ending. And then there's the boss. It was a fairly simple boss. I had to think of something I could do with a boss mechanic, and I thought, well, dropping a statue on top of him is fun, so why not try this out? The only thing I don't really like about this boss is that there's nothing earlier in the game where you have to throw the statue on top of someone. This is something that can be done in the sequel, but not in this one, so it doesn't really make sense. And also you have to kill him by throwing your head onto it. This is fairly unique. This puzzled a lot of people, but on the other hand it's the boss, so it's not bad if it requires some thinking and some trying out and a couple of tries before you make it. So yeah, then I walk into this portal and it's the end. I won't cover the challenge level because it's more of the same, but with more challenging timing problems, so it's just a little bit more difficult in the platforming aspect and not so much on the puzzling aspect. As for the workflow of creating those puzzles, I think I will cover them in the next video because I've used up a lot of time already, and I think it would be interesting to cover the workflow a little bit more in depth. Also, I could combine it with the next devlog because I have a lot of elements in the new Headwizard game at the moment. So I will probably use the new Headwizard game to demonstrate my workflow for creating puzzles. For now, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please leave a like. And if you want to stay updated on this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I hope to see you in the next video.